Oh, so now you're quiet. Nah, you've always been silent, still, unshaken. But guess what? They watched, they whispered, they laughed. They thought you didn't know, but you knew everything. The plans, the knives, the snakes in suits. You saw it all. Behind your stillness was a loaded silence. A walking trap, ticking, waiting, breathing like thunder under ice. And now they're terrified, because the one who never spoke now walks like a sentence. No words, just consequences. Asterisk, they begged for a reaction. You gave them patience. They tried to pull strings. You burned the puppet show. They built a rumor. You became the storm. No moves, no warnings, just quiet calculations. You learned their codes. You broke their facades. You outplayed the game without even touching the board. You never flinched, not once. And that scared them more than 1,000 screams. Because monsters don't shout. They study, they observe, and then they strike like regret. Dressed in flesh, they laughed when you stared. Now they run when you blink. Why? Because your silence was never fear. It was focus. A sniper's breath. Before everything explodes. Asterisk, they mistook your silence for softness. They labeled it weakness. Fools. You were just listening, tracking every lie, every fake smile, every bro that carried a blade. You mapped their chaos like a surgeon marking skin. And now, you're not breaking. You're carving. No speeches, no mercy, just moves. Cold, calculated, unapologetic. You let them dance. You let them flex. You let them think they were safe. Then you flipped the whole script without saying a single word. Because your silence wasn't peace. It was war tuning its aim. They joked, they mocked, they threw dirt on your name. Now they dig to hide from your shadow. You didn't disappear. You evolved. You didn't fold. You froze. Long enough to turn heat into armor. You remember everything. The betrayals, the fake cheers, the setups, the silent hate. Yeah, you catalogued it all, like a hit list carved on the back of your smile. And now you're not healing, you're hunting. Asterisk, you walked in silence, but your energy, louder than their screams. Every step you took was a countdown. Every glance, a warning. And they missed it all, because they were too busy worshipping their own lies. You didn't react. You remembered. You didn't fight back. You let time load the bullet. Now look, they're panicking, backpedaling, pretending to forget the war they started behind your back. But you never forgot, never forgave. You just waited, ... Like a shadow behind their confidence. They thought they got away. They thought you moved on. They thought the silence meant surrender. Wrong. It meant calculation. It meant precision. It meant every piece was falling exactly where you wanted it. And now, they're sweating in rooms you haven't even entered. They're watching their backs in crowds that ain't even watching them. Because once a ghost becomes real, ... it doesn't knock. It crashes, it destroys, and it never speaks. It just delivers. Asterisk, now they act confused. Now they play innocent. Now they say, we didn't mean it. Too late. The silence you gave was never weakness. It was a sentence. And now they're serving it. You became the nightmare they laughed at. You became the revenge they never saw coming. You didn't scream. You didn't break. You just switched cold, unrecognizable, unforgiving. They called you fake. You became untouchable. They called you soft. You turned into smoke. They tried to box you in. You melted through the cracks, and set the whole place on fire. Now they look at you like a myth, like a ghost that remembers names, but forgets mercy. You watched them plot. You heard them laugh. You saw them celebrate your silence like it was a win. It wasn't. It was the fuse. And now the blast is echoing through their comfort. You never touched them, but now your silence does. Like a storm that doesn't ask for permission. They made you this quiet. They made you this focused. They made you this dangerous. Asterisk they used to ignore you. Now they study you, frame by frame, step by step, searching for signs of the storm they accidentally created. But there are no signs, no clues, just silence wrapped in danger. And that's what shakes them most. You're not loud, you're not wild, you're still, and stillness. That's deadly when it comes from someone who's already died inside and came back smiling. They whisper now, low tones, nervous, glances, because they know you're not done. You're just getting warmed up. No threats, no warnings, just presence, sharp enough to slice the air. They thought your silence meant you had nothing, but the truth is, you had everything: memory, patience, and the kind of pain that doesn't cry. It constructs. They made the noise, you built the fire, they danced around your name, you carved it in stone, and now every room you enter feels colder. Every breath you take carries weight. Every stare feels like a verdict, because silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. Asterisk, they thought you were done. They thought the silence was the end of your story. But silence was just the loading screen. And now you're fully downloaded, upgraded, untouchable. They wanted a meltdown. You gave them a masterpiece. They wanted chaos. You became the architect of it. Every step you take now feels like thunder, wrapped in control. You walk in shadows, but your presence sets off alarms, because they finally realize, the quiet ones, they're not harmless, they're timed, and your time. It arrived like karma wearing a grin. You don't raise your voice. You raise your standards. You don't chase. You watch them crumble under their own lies. Let them run, let them fake it. Let them pretend it was all a misunderstanding. But deep down, they know they played with fire. Now they're inhaling smoke. They built the drama. Now they're drowning in the silence they once mocked. You didn't just survive. You switched dimensions. They're still playing games in the dust, while you're rewriting the rules with blood ink and no apologies. Asterisk, you didn't roar, you didn't shout, you vanished, and came back with eyes they can't look into, because now you see through them. Every fake smile, every false check-in. You read it all like a dead language they thought you forgot. They gave you silence first. You just returned it with interest. Multiplied, sharpened, loaded. You used to care. Now you calculate. You used to explain. Now you let karma do the introductions, and suddenly they're paranoid, jumping at shadows, overthinking your stillness. Because you don't explain anymore. You execute. No need for revenge speeches. Just moves they never saw coming. Because you're not emotional, you're surgical. They remember who you were. That's their mistake. You remember who they are. That's your advantage. Now every step you take feels like a countdown, and every second they breathe feels borrowed. Because your silence now feels louder than anything they've ever heard. And the scariest part, you still haven't said a word. But they finally get it. You knew everything. Asterisk. They keep asking, why aren't you saying anything? Because you already did. In silence, in steps, in moves that spoke louder than their entire circle ever could. You don't need a mic. You are the echo they can't escape. You don't need to scream. Your silence has volume now, and it's breaking bones they swore were untouchable. Every time they speak, they reveal more fear. Every time you stare, they lose another mask. Because your stillness, it's venom. Slow, precise, unavoidable. They don't fear your voice. They fear what you've become without saying a single thing. A phantom, with memory like steel and patience like fire. They try to bury you with whispers. Now they drown in the silence you command like a weapon. You didn't vanish. You reconstructed into something they can't predict, can't manipulate, can't label. You walk past them like they were never there. And somehow, that burns more than any revenge you could have screamed out loud, because the truth they lost. You, the moment you chose silence over explanation, and now you're not cold. You're untouchable. Asterisk, they still don't get it. You're not avoiding them. You've outgrown them. They became background noise in a world you now control. They gossip in circles. You move in silence. They chase closure. You built distance so wide it echoes. They're haunted now by every moment they thought you were weak, by every message you left unread, by every smile you never returned. You didn't block them. You outpaced them. You didn't clap back. You rewired the game so their names aren't even required anymore. And that silence, it's not passive, it's punishment. Because what hurts most ain't rage, it's irrelevance. It's being forgotten by the one who remembered everything. They don't hear from you, but they hear about you, and that eats them alive. You became what they said you'd never be: untouchable, unapologetic, unfazed, no closure, no explanation. Just your shadow moving through life like they never existed. And now, their karma looks a lot like your silence, and it speaks fluently. Asterisk, they used to walk loud, now they whisper. They used to smirk, now they scan every room before speaking your name. Because your silence, it changed the atmosphere. It shifted gravity. They feel heavy now, even when you're not around. They search for signs that you're still watching, still listening, still calculating. But you've already moved on. And that kills them slowly. You don't stalk. You don't chase. You haunt. Because silence isn't absence. It's presence they can't escape. They thought the storm was over. But you were never a storm. You were the climate. And now their comfort. Frozen. You let them live in a world where you're no longer reacting. You're just remembered. And that memory, it tightens around their necks with every success you no longer share. You didn't change to prove a point. You changed because the old you would have clapped back. This version just leaves them crumbling in confusion. And the best part, you still haven't spoken. But everything around them feels like your voice got louder without ever saying a word. Asterisk now. They overthink every move you don't make. They panic when you don't show up, because your absence feels heavier than anyone else's presence. You became the consequence they laughed at. And now they study your silence like scripture, looking for clues in your calm, trying to decode what you already buried. They used to throw shade. Now they search for light, but it's gone because you took it with you when you left. Without a word, they told the world you were nothing. Now they explain to everyone why you're everything they can't stop watching. You don't threaten. You don't post. You don't engage. but still, you shake rooms just by being mentioned. You didn't clap back, you vanished, and your silence started writing legends, cold, unreachable, respected by some, feared by all they tried to control. The story, but you rewrote it in shadows with truth they'll never recover from. Now, they speak softly when your name comes up, not because they forgot what they did, but because they remember who you became. Asterisk, you don't have enemies. You have witnesses, people who saw you fall, and can't explain how you rose without making a sound. They used to mock your silence. Now they fear it, because you never needed noise. You became a presence, heavy, undeniable, unshakable. They refresh your page more than their own. Not to cheer, but to check if the ghost they created still breathes, and worse, thrives. You used to want closure. Now you want distance. Silence turned surgical, and your energy, no longer shared, just felt like a warning shot that never needed firing. They didn't think you'd survive. Now they don't know how to survive you, because the quiet one, the calm one, the patient one, yeah, that one turned out to be the end game. They replay the past. You rewrite the future, and the roles reversed. You're not the victim anymore. You're the lesson, one they'll never admit but never forget. And all it took was a silence sharp enough to scar their pride forever. Asterisk, they thought silence was weakness. Now they wear it like a chain around their ego. You stopped replying, and somehow that hurt more than every scream they ever ignored. Because you don't argue, you upgrade, you don't expose, you evolve. They tried to pull you down, but you weren't on the same level. You were underground, studying, stacking, transforming. You disappeared for a while, and when you returned, even the air started acting different. They lost access. They lost control. They lost the version of you that cared to explain. Now all they get is silence with a shadow too big to confront. You don't move with anger. You move with awareness, and that terrifies them, because people can fight rage. They can dismiss noise, but silence changes the room. They never imagined the quiet one would outlast the chaos. But now you stand, not louder, just inevitable. No screams, no revenge plots, just progress they can't interrupt, and a presence they'll never escape. You don't need revenge. You became the proof that walking away was the real weapon. Asterisk, they thought you were frozen, but you were forging, rebuilding yourself in silence while they mistook your pause for defeat. You weren't broken, you were buffering, and now you run like fire through everything they thought was solid. They tried to study you, but you're not a pattern. You're not a phase. You're a problem with no formula and no mercy. They're still speaking your name in circles you no longer sit in, still checking your silence like it holds answers they were too fake to deserve. You gave them kindness. They gave you chaos. You gave them distance. Now they call it cold, but that's not cold. That's precision. You don't ignore them. You erase them from thought, from energy, from access, completely, because what they never understood is you were never quiet. You were containing a storm, and once it moved, it didn't scream. It consumed. They thought they buried you, but they were standing on ground you were learning to own. Now every step you take shakes their image of who they thought you were. You didn't come back stronger. You came back unrecognizable. Asterisk, they still don't get it. You weren't quiet because you were scared. You were quiet because you were calculating. You watched You listened. You let them laugh, while you studied every crack in their confidence. And now, you're the silence that steals breath. The calm that makes people stutter. The presence that rewrites tension with a single glance. You didn't need closure. You became the conclusion. Sharp, sudden, and undeniable. They underestimated your silence, because they never knew it was the sound of power loading. You're not angry, you're finished. And when you're finished, there's no warning, no screaming match, just a shift. So cold it burns. Now they flinch when someone moves like you. Now they hesitate when the room goes quiet, because you taught them the most painful lesson. Silence can destroy without lifting a single hand. You gave no threats, just absence. You made no excuses, just progress. And now, your distance feels like a punishment they weren't ready for, because the truth is, you never needed to win the fight. You just needed to show them you could walk away and still win everything. Asterisk, they never saw it coming. Not the silence, not the shift, not the version of you that didn't care to explain. You were their favorite target when you were soft. Now you're the one they can't look in the eyes, because the silence ick grew teeth, and now it bites without warning. You're not hiding, you're elevating, too high for their games, too far for their reach. They thought your absence was retreat, but absence was evolution. You didn't go quiet, you went deadly. No movement wasted, no emotion shown. Just progress that screams louder than any comeback ever could. They created a monster by mocking your peace. Now they whisper your name like it summons something they can't control. You didn't lose them. You removed them, surgically, effortlessly, without closure, without a scene. Because that's the scariest version of you, the one that disappears with every scar healed, and no soul left to convince. You became exactly what they feared, unreachable, unforgettable, asterisk. They used to laugh at your silence. Now they drown in it, because nothing hits harder than the sound of someone who stopped caring. You gave them time, they gave you excuses, you gave them loyalty, they gave you reasons. Now you give them distance, and it hurts more than anything you ever said. You didn't need revenge. You became the standard. Now every person they meet feels dull, empty, disposable, because you had depth they tried to destroy, but couldn't understand. They didn't break you. They revealed you. And what's left now isn't nice, isn't soft. It's calculated, composed, deadly. They thought silence was the absence of power, but your silence is the presence of every dark truth they tried to bury. You didn't speak. You vanished, and somehow you became everything they can't stop feeling. Now they fear the spaces you no longer fill. They fear the version of you that doesn't care to look back. And that's the scariest part. You're not angry. You're not bitter. You're just gone, asterisk. They thought the silence was temporary, just a phase, a pause. But what they didn't realize was you don't pause. You detach, and once you detach, there's no comeback, no call, no apology that can reopen a door you burned from the hinges. They stalk your glow from the shadows now, the same shadows they tried to throw you into, but you don't exist in light or dark anymore. You exist above it, beyond noise, beyond reach, beyond guilt. You didn't just level up, you left the game and took the board with you. They tried to turn your silence into a weakness, but now it's legend, it's fear, it's proof that calm is the loudest kind of power. No revenge, no speech, no reaction, Just distance, just growth, just silence, so loud, it echoes forever. They'll never forget you, not because you screamed, not because you begged, but because you looked at the fire and walked through it. No scars shone,